If someone had asked me 6 months ago what my perfect wedding would look like, I would have painted them a picture straight from a fairy tale. Ivory silk cascading down marble steps, the scent of gardenias filling the grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club, and the gentle hum of a string quartet as I walked toward Michael, my college sweetheart, waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes. I had spent countless nights lying awake, sketching every detail in my mind. The pearl buttons running down my spine, the way my grandmother's diamond tiara would catch the afternoon light, even the exact shade of blush pink for the bridesmaids' dresses. I believed in happily ever after with the fierce conviction of someone who had never truly been tested by life. At 24, I thought love was enough to conquer anything, that family meant unconditional support, and that dreams, if you wanted them badly enough, would simply materialize into reality. I was naive in the most beautiful way, and perhaps that innocence was what made what happened next so devastating. The morning of what should have been my wedding day, I woke before dawn in my childhood bedroom, in my parents' sprawling colonial home in Westchester. The house felt different somehow, too quiet, like the silence before a storm. Usually, my mother Elizabeth would already be bustling around the kitchen, orchestrating the day's events with military precision. She lived for these moments, when she could showcase our family's place in society, when every detail would be photographed and discussed at the country club for months to come. But the kitchen was empty when I padded downstairs in my silk pajamas, hoping for coffee, and maybe a moment of calm, before the beautiful chaos began. The marble countertops gleamed in the early morning light, undisturbed, no coffee brewing, no caterers arriving early, no florists adjusting arrangements, just silence and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I called out for my parents, my voice echoing strangely in the empty house. Mom? Dad? Nothing. I checked the driveway through the front windows. Both cars were gone. My heart began to race with the anxiety I couldn't quite name. Where could they possibly be on my wedding morning? I was reaching for my phone when I heard the front door open. Relief flooded through me as I heard familiar footsteps, but it quickly turned to confusion when I saw my parents in the foyer. My father, Richard, was impeccably dressed as always, but he wore dark sunglasses despite the early hour, and his usually warm smile was nowhere to be found. My mother looked elegant in a cream-colored traveling suit I'd never seen before, her silver hair perfectly styled, but her face was cold, distant. Where were you? I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the knot forming in my stomach. I was worried something had happened. My mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she approached me with something in her hands. A large white box tied with a silver ribbon. The kind of box that usually contains something precious, something to be treasured. My heart leaped for a moment, thinking perhaps this was a special wedding gift, a family heirloom to make the day even more meaningful. For your future, darling, she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. She pressed the box into my hands and then stepped back, as if she couldn't bear to be close to me. What is this? I asked, but she was already turning away. We have a flight to catch, my father said, his words clipped and formal. We'll be in touch. Flight? What flight? Dad, what's going on? Panic was rising in my chest now, sharp and immediate. You can't leave. The wedding is in 6 hours. All our friends are coming. The photographer will be here soon. The flowers. There won't be a wedding, my mother said, not even looking back at me as she headed toward the door. I stood frozen in the foyer, the white box heavy in my hands, watching my parents, the people who had raised me, who had helped me plan this day for months, walk out of the house as if I meant nothing to them. The front door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through my entire world. My hands trembled as I untied the silver ribbon. Inside, nested in layers of white tissue paper, was my wedding dress. But it wasn't the pristine gown I had tried on just days before. The delicate lace was singed black around the edges, the silk bodice bore dark stains, and the entire dress reeked of smoke and something else I couldn't identify. It looked like it had been rescued from a fire, or perhaps thrown into one deliberately. Underneath the ruined dress, I found a small card in my mother's elegant handwriting. This is what happens to dreams built on lies. Find your own way now. I sank to the floor of the foyer, the destroyed dress spilling around me like the remnants of every hope I'd ever held. The grandfather clock continued its steady ticking, marking time, that felt suddenly meaningless. In the space of 10 minutes, my entire life had collapsed. No parents, no wedding, no fairy tale. Just me, alone in a house that no longer felt like home, holding the ashes of everything I thought I wanted. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass window above the front door, casting rainbow patterns on the marble floor where I sat. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think was how wrong I had been about everything. about love, about family, about the life I thought was waiting for me just hours away. I don't know how long I sat on that marble floor, clutching the ruins of my wedding dress. Time seemed to move differently in the aftermath of devastation. Seconds dragging like hours, yet somehow the morning sun had climbed higher in the sky without my notice. The house felt like a mausoleum around me, filled with the ghosts of all the memories I'd thought were real. My bridesmaids would be arriving soon. Sarah, my maid of honor since college, was probably already getting her hair done, excited to help me into my dress and take those getting ready photos we'd planned. Jessica and Emma would be giggling over mimosas, adjusting their pink dresses, checking their makeup one final time. They had no idea that there would be no bride to dress, no photos to take, no celebration to attend. The thought of their faces when they arrived at an empty house made my stomach lurch. I couldn't bear to see their confusion turn to pity, to have to explain what I didn't understand myself. But more than that, I realized with growing horror that I would have to call Michael. Michael, who was probably at his apartment downtown with his groomsmen, nervous and excited, maybe running through his vows one more time. Michael, who had spent the last 2 years building a life with me, who had proposed on the beach in Cape Cod with shaking hands and tears in his eyes. Michael, who had no idea that both of our futures had just been incinerated by my parents' cruelty. My phone felt impossibly heavy as I scrolled to his name. My hands were still shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to dial. The phone rang once, twice, and then his familiar voice filled the silence of the empty house. "Hey, beautiful," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I know we're not supposed to talk today, but I couldn't help myself. I'm so nervous I think I might throw up, but the good kind of nervous, you know? I can't wait to see you walking down that aisle. I can't wait to call you my wife." The words hit me like physical blows. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a sob came out. "Emma, what's wrong? Are you okay? Emma." He'd called me Emma, the name only he used, short for Emily. Hearing it now, with such tenderness and concern, made everything so much worse. "Michael," I managed to choke out. "Something's happened. Something terrible." The silence on the other end of the line stretched endlessly. I could picture him in his apartment, probably dressed in his tuxedo pants and white shirt, his tie still hanging undone around his neck because he always waited until the last minute to tie it properly. I could see his face shifting from confusion to alarm. "What do you mean? Emma, you're scaring me." "They're gone," I whispered. "My parents are gone. They left for some flight, and they destroyed my dress, Michael. They burned it." There's a note saying. I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too cruel to repeat. "What? That doesn't make sense. Destroyed your dress?" "Emma, slow down. Where are you right now?" "I'm at home. In the house. But it's empty, Michael. They're not coming back for the wedding. I don't think they want there to be a wedding at all." Another long silence. I could hear him breathing, could almost hear his mind racing to process what I was telling him. "Okay," he said finally, his voice taking on that calm, practical tone he used when he was trying to solve a problem. "Okay, this is fixable. We'll figure this out. We can get another dress, we can." "It's not about the dress." The words exploded out of me with more force than I intended. "Don't you understand? They planned this. They waited until today, until the morning of our wedding to destroy everything. They don't want me to marry you, Michael. They've never wanted me to marry you." The truth of it hit me as I spoke the words aloud. My parents had been polite to Michael over the past 2 years, had included him in family dinners and holiday celebrations, but there had always been something cold underneath their smiles. Something that made me work twice as hard to prove that he was worthy of their approval, that I was making the right choice. "That's not true," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They love you. They want you to be happy." "Do they?" I laughed bitterly. "Because leaving me alone on my wedding day, with a burned dress and a note telling me to find my own way, doesn't feel like love, Michael. It feels like punishment." I could hear voices in the background on his end, probably his groomsmen arriving, ready to help him get ready for the happiest day of his life. The day that was never going to come. "Emma, listen to me," he said, and I could hear him moving, probably stepping away from the others so they couldn't hear. "I love you. We love each other. That's what matters. Your parents, maybe they're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe they're scared of losing you. I don't know. But we can work through this." "Can we?" I asked, and even as I said it, I felt something shift inside me. A door closing, or maybe opening. Can we really build a marriage on the foundation of my family's hatred? Because that's what this is, Michael. Hatred. They hate you, or they hate me, or they hate what we represent, and I'm starting to think they're not the only ones. "What do you mean?" I closed my eyes, thinking of all the small moments over the past months when Michael had seemed distant, distracted. The way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. The conversations that ended too quickly when I walked into a room. The phone calls he took in private. "Have they talked to you?" I asked quietly. "My parents. Have they said things to you that you haven't told me?" The pause before he answered told me everything I needed to know. "Emma." "What did they say, Michael?" Another pause, longer this time. They had concerns about whether we were compatible long-term, about whether we wanted the same things." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that I loved you, that we would figure it out." "Would figure what out?" He sighed heavily. "They thought maybe we were too young, that maybe we should wait a few more years, make sure we were really ready for marriage." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from. "And you agreed with them?" "I didn't agree. I listened." "Emma, they're your parents. I thought they knew you better than anyone." "Better than you do, you mean?" "That's not what I said." But it was what he meant. I could hear it in his voice, the doubt that had been planted and allowed to grow. My parents hadn't just destroyed my dress. They had been systematically destroying my relationship for months, and I had been too blind to see it. "I can't do this," I said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me that I hadn't known existed. "I can't marry someone who has to be convinced that I'm worth it." "Emma, no, that's not." "Yes, it is." I was standing now, still holding the ruined dress but feeling strangely lighter. "If you loved me the way I thought you did, the way I love you, you would have told them to go to hell. You would have fought for us." "I am fighting for us. I'm here, aren't I? I want to marry you today." "Do you? Or do you want to marry the version of me that your doubts and my parents' poison haven't touched yet?" The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we couldn't say, and everything we'd never be able to take back. "I think," I said softly, "that maybe they were right about one thing. Maybe we aren't ready for this. Maybe I'm not ready for this. Emma, please, don't let them win. Don't let them destroy what we have." But as I looked around the empty house, at the destroyed dress in my hands, at the life I'd built that had crumbled in a single morning, I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt like the first honest thought I'd had in months. Maybe what we had was already broken, Michael. Maybe I just couldn't see it until now. I ended the call before he could respond, before I could lose my nerve, before I could let his voice pull me back into a life that had never really been mine at all. The house was silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Not empty, but expectant, like the pause between one song ending and another beginning. After ending the call with Michael, I sat in the profound silence of my childhood home and felt something I had never experienced before. Complete freedom, mixed with absolute terror. For the first time in my 24 years, I had no plan, no expectations to meet, no one else's vision of my life to fulfill. The feeling was both exhilarating and paralyzing. I knew I couldn't stay in this house. Soon my bridesmaids would arrive, then the photographers, then all the wedding guests who would drive up to find empty rooms and unanswered questions. I couldn't bear to be the center of that kind of attention, to have to explain over and over again how my life had imploded in a single morning. More than that, I couldn't stand the thought of their pity, their well-meaning attempts to fix something that felt fundamentally unfixable. Moving on autopilot, I went upstairs to my bedroom and threw a few essentials into my old college backpack. Some clothes, my laptop, the small amount of cash I kept in my jewelry box, and my passport, though I had no idea why I grabbed that last item. Maybe some part of me was already planning to run farther than I could imagine. I paused at my dresser, looking at the framed photos that documented what I had thought was a happy life. Me and Michael at his graduation. Our families together at last Christmas, everyone smiling for the camera. Me and my parents at my college graduation, their arms around me, pride shining in their faces. Had it all been an act? Had they been planning this betrayal even then, just waiting for the right moment to destroy everything? Animaheka. I swept the photos into a drawer, unable to look at them anymore. Then I grabbed the ruined wedding dress and stuffed it into a large shopping bag. I wasn't sure why I was taking it with me, perhaps as evidence of their cruelty, or maybe as a reminder that fairy tales were just stories we told ourselves to make reality bearable. Before leaving, I scrawled a quick note for my bridesmaids. Family emergency. Wedding postponed indefinitely. I'm sorry. I-E. I left it on the kitchen counter where they would find it, knowing it was inadequate, but unable to find words for something so unprecedented. I drove my small Honda Civic away from Westchester with no destination in mind, just a desperate need to be anywhere but there. The radio played cheerful pop songs that felt like mockery, so I turned it off and drove in silence through the familiar streets of my childhood, seeing them as if for the first time. Or perhaps, for the last time. Without consciously deciding, I found myself heading south toward New York City. The city had always represented possibility to me, a place where people went to reinvent themselves, to become someone new. It seemed fitting that I would end up there now, when I needed to figure out who I was without my parents' expectations, or Michael's love to define me. The drive gave me time to think, though my thoughts moved in circles. I kept replaying the morning's events, searching for signs I should have seen, for moments when I could have changed the trajectory of everything. But the more I analyzed it, the more I realized that this confrontation had been inevitable. My parents had never really approved of Michael, and Michael had never really defended our relationship against their subtle undermining. I had been the only one truly invested in making it work, and that was never going to be enough. By the time I reached Manhattan, it was late afternoon. The city buzzed with its usual energy, people rushing to important places, living their important lives, completely unaware that mine had just ended. I parked in an expensive garage, knowing I couldn't afford it but not caring anymore about practical concerns like money. I walked the streets aimlessly for hours, carrying my backpack and the bag with my ruined dress, feeling like a ghost among the living. Everyone around me seemed so purposeful, so certain of where they belonged and where they were going. I envied them that certainty. As evening approached, the city took on a different character. The business crowds gave way to people seeking entertainment, romance, escape. I watched couples walking hand in hand and felt a pang of loss so sharp it nearly doubled me over. This morning I had been one half of a couple. I had been someone's fiancé, someone's daughter, someone with a place in the world. Now I was just Emily, alone, with no idea what that meant. I found myself in Washington Square Park as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The park was alive with musicians, street performers, chess players, and people simply enjoying the evening. I sat on a bench and watched a young couple sharing ice cream, laughing at some private joke, completely absorbed in each other. They looked the way Michael and I used to look, I realized. Before doubt crept in, before my parents' poison took hold, before we started trying so hard to prove our love that we forgot to simply feel it. That's when my phone started ringing. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and my heart clenched. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear his voice promising that we could work through this, that love was enough to overcome anything. But I knew better now. I knew that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired with good intentions and wishful thinking. I let the call go to voicemail. Then another call came, and another. Sarah, my maid of honor, probably standing in my empty house, confused and worried. Jessica, my mother, though seeing her name on my screen made me feel sick. I turned the phone off entirely. As darkness fell over the city, I realized I had nowhere to go. I had fled without a plan, and now I was sitting in a park with a backpack, a ruined wedding dress, and about $300 in cash. I could get a hotel room for a night or two, but then what? I couldn't go back to Westchester. That life was over. I couldn't face Michael or my friends, couldn't bear their questions and their pity. The bench where I sat was under a streetlight, and I watched the parade of nighttime city life pass by, a group of college students heading to a party, loud and carefree. An elderly man walking his dog, stopping to let the animal investigate every interesting smell. A businessman talking rapidly into his phone, his day apparently far from over. Each person had somewhere to be, someone waiting for them, a life that made sense. I pulled the wedding dress out of the shopping bag and looked at it under the streetlight. The damage was even worse than I had initially thought. The delicate beadwork my mother and I had spent hours choosing was melted and distorted. The silk that had made me feel like a princess was stained and torn. It was beyond saving, beyond repair. Just like everything else in my life, it seemed. But as I sat there holding the ruins of my dream, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the anonymity of the city, the way no one looked twice at a woman sitting alone with a destroyed wedding dress. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying so much pain and disappointment, or maybe it was simply the recognition that I had reached the bottom, and the only direction left was up. I thought about the person I had been this morning, eager to please, desperate for approval, willing to ignore red flags if it meant maintaining the illusion of a perfect life. That person felt like a stranger to me now. She had been so afraid of disappointing others that she had forgotten to consider what she actually wanted for herself. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel angry. Not just sad or hurt, but genuinely angry at my parents for their cruelty, at Michael for his weakness, at myself for being so blind to the truth. The anger felt clean and energizing in a way that grief hadn't. Anger was something I could use. A young woman about my age walked by, talking animatedly to her friend about a job interview she'd had that day. "I know it's a risk," she was saying, "but sometimes you have to bet on yourself, you know? Sometimes you have to take the leap." Take the leap. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched her disappear into the crowd. Maybe that's what this was. Not an ending, but a beginning. Maybe losing everything I thought I wanted was the only way to discover what I actually needed. I carefully folded the ruined dress and put it back in the bag. I wasn't ready to throw it away yet, but I was starting to understand that it represented something more than just a wedding that would never happen. It was a symbol of a life I had been trying to live for other people, a life that had never really fit me properly. Standing up from the bench, I shouldered my backpack and began walking deeper into the city. I still didn't know where I was going, but for the first time since this morning, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than terror. The city stretched out before me, full of strangers and stories and second chances. I was just one more person trying to figure out her place in the world, and somehow that felt like exactly where I needed to be. I had been walking through the city for what felt like hours, my feet aching in the heels I'd worn that morning when I still believed I'd be walking down an aisle by evening. The streets had grown quieter as the night deepened, and I found myself in a part of Manhattan I didn't recognize, somewhere between the Village and Soho, where elegant brownstones lined tree-covered streets. My stomach was cramping from hunger. I'd been too nervous to eat breakfast and too devastated to think about food since then. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was finally wearing off, leaving me exhausted and shaky. I needed to find somewhere to stay, somewhere to think, somewhere to figure out what came next. But first, I needed to sit down before my legs gave out entirely. I spotted a small bench tucked between two streetlights, partially hidden by the drooping branches of an old oak tree. It seemed as good a place as any to rest and try to make sense of my situation. I sank onto the bench gratefully, setting my backpack and the bag with my wedding dress beside me. The irony wasn't lost on me. 12 hours ago, I had been worried about whether the flowers would arrive on time and if my hair would hold its curl in the humidity. Now I was homeless, alone, and trying to figure out how to survive on $300 in one of the most expensive cities in the world. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice the car until it pulled up directly in front of me. It was sleek and black, the kind of vehicle that whispered wealth without shouting it. For a moment, panic flashed through me. Had my parents somehow tracked me down? Had Michael come to find me? But the man who stepped out of the passenger side was no one I recognized. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in a magazine. Even in the dim streetlight, I could see that he was handsome in that effortless way that suggested good genes and better grooming. He looked like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely, one where people didn't end up sitting on park benches with their life in a backpack. "Excuse me," he said, approaching slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. His voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place, maybe British or European. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you all right?" I must have looked as pathetic as I felt. Here I was, a woman in yesterday's clothes, crying on a bench in the middle of the night, clutching a bag that undoubtedly smelled like smoke and heartbreak. I should have been embarrassed, should have pulled myself together and pretended I was fine. Instead, I found myself laughing, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "Do I look all right?" I asked, echoing the same bitter question I'd posed to myself a dozen times that day. To my surprise, he smiled. Not the condescending smile I expected, but something warm and genuine. "Fair point," he said. "Mind if I try a different approach? You look like someone who could use a friend, and I happen to be someone who believes in helping strangers when I can." I studied his face, searching for signs of ulterior motives or danger. But all I saw was concern, and something that looked like kindness. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the way this entire day had shattered my ability to predict anything, but I found myself nodding. "I'm Alexander," he said, taking a step closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. "Alexander Blackwood. And before you ask, yes, I know how that sounds. Like a character from a romance novel. My parents had pretentious taste in names." Despite everything, I felt my lips curve into what might have been the first genuine smile I'd managed all day. "Emily," I said. Emily Chen. And my parents, I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. My parents were many things, but at least they weren't pretentious about names. Emily, he repeated, and somehow my name sounded different in his accent. Would you allow me to buy you dinner? There's a quiet place nearby. Nothing fancy, just good food and no questions asked. You look like you haven't eaten in a while. I should have said no. Every self-preservation instinct I possessed was screaming at me not to go anywhere with a strange man, no matter how well-dressed or seemingly kind. But those same instincts had failed me catastrophically when it came to my own family, so maybe they weren't worth trusting. Why would you want to help me? I asked instead. You don't know anything about me. I could be dangerous. He glanced pointedly at my backpack and the shopping bag, then back at my face, which I was sure showed every emotion I'd experienced that day. Somehow, I doubt that. You look like someone who's had a very bad day, not someone who's planning to cause trouble for strangers. The worst day, I corrected quietly. Then you definitely need dinner, he said, and maybe someone to listen if you want to talk about it. No obligations, no expectations. Just food and conversation with someone who has no agenda beyond basic human decency. I looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere offering kindness when I needed it most. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was dangerous, but in that moment, the alternative, spending the night alone on a bench, hungry and afraid, seemed worse than taking a chance on someone who might actually care. Okay, I said, surprising myself, but I should warn you, it's a really long story, and not a very pretty one. The best stories rarely are, he replied, extending his hand to help me up from the bench. The restaurant he led me to was exactly as he'd described, small, quiet, and unpretentious, despite being in an obviously expensive neighborhood. The kind of place where the waitstaff didn't bat an eye at a woman carrying a shopping bag that smelled like smoke, or at the fact that she was clearly underdressed for the elegant surroundings. Alexander, just Alex, please, ordered for both of us after confirming I had no dietary restrictions, choosing things that sounded comforting rather than impressive. Soup, fresh bread, pasta with simple sauce. Food that would actually fill the hollow ache in my stomach rather than just look pretty on a plate. For the first few minutes, I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was overwhelmed by the warmth of the restaurant, the kindness of this stranger, and the simple relief of being somewhere safe and clean. Alex didn't push. He simply sat across from me, occasionally making gentle observations about the food or the restaurant, giving me space to collect myself. When the soup arrived and I took my first spoonful, I realized I was ravenous. I'd had nothing but coffee since the night before, and my body was finally reminding me of its basic needs. Alex watched me eat with what looked like satisfaction, as if he'd accomplished something important just by getting food into me. Better? He asked when I'd finished most of the soup. Much, I admitted. Thank you. I didn't realize how hungry I was. Shock does that, he said matter-of-factly. Makes you forget about basic things, like eating and sleeping. I take it something shocking happened to you today? And somehow, sitting in that warm restaurant with this kind stranger, the whole story came pouring out of me. My parents' abandonment, the burned wedding dress, Michael's call and the revelation of his doubts. My flight to the city with no plan and nowhere to go. Alex listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as I talked, but never judgmental or pitying. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning his wine glass slowly in his hands. That, he said finally, is extraordinary cruelty. I'm sorry you experienced that. Extraordinary cruelty. I rolled the phrase around in my mind. That's exactly what it was, isn't it? I keep trying to find some explanation, some way to understand why they would do this, but maybe there isn't one. Maybe some people are just capable of cruelty, even to their own children. Especially to their own children sometimes, Alex said quietly. The people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are often the ones who inflict the deepest wounds, because they know exactly where to aim. There was something in his voice that suggested personal experience, but I didn't pry. This stranger had already given me more kindness and understanding than my family had shown me in years. What will you do now? He asked. I have no idea, I admitted. I left without thinking. I have a little money, enough for a hotel room for a few nights, but after that, I shrugged helplessly. Alex was quiet again, studying my face with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable but somehow didn't. There was something calculating in his expression, but not in a predatory way, more like he was solving a puzzle or working through a complex problem. Emily, he said finally, his voice careful and measured, What I'm about to suggest is going to sound absolutely insane, and I want you to know that you can say no without any hard feelings or awkwardness. But sometimes, life presents us with opportunities that look nothing like what we expected. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is say yes to the impossible. My heart started beating faster. What are you suggesting? He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. Marry me. The words hung in the air between us like something tangible, something I could reach out and touch. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry, what? I know how it sounds, he said quickly. We've known each other for exactly 3 hours, and you've just had your heart broken in the most spectacular way possible. But hear me out. You need a new life, a fresh start, somewhere your family can't hurt you anymore. I can give you that. I can give you security, respect, and the freedom to figure out who you are when you're not trying to please people who don't deserve your efforts. You want to marry me, I repeated slowly. A woman you met on a park bench 3 hours ago. I want to offer you a partnership, he corrected. A chance to build something real together, without the baggage and expectations that destroyed your last relationship. You wouldn't have to worry about money, or housing, or any of the practical things that make starting over so difficult. You'd have time and space to heal, to grow, to become whoever you're meant to be. I should have laughed. I should have stood up and walked away from this clearly insane man who was proposing marriage to a complete stranger. Instead, I found myself considering it, turning the idea over in my mind like a puzzle piece that might actually fit. Why? I asked finally. Why would you want to do this? Alex smiled, and for the first time since we'd met, he looked almost vulnerable. Because sometimes, Emily, life gives you exactly what you need in the most unexpected package. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get the chance to give someone else exactly what they need too. I barely slept that night in the hotel room Alex had insisted on paying for. I lay on the crisp white sheets, staring at the ceiling and replaying our conversation over and over. Marry me. 2 words that should have sounded ridiculous coming from a stranger, but instead felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. Alex had walked me to the hotel after dinner, giving me his business card and telling me to call him in the morning with my answer. No pressure, he'd said. No expectations. Just think about it. But how could I think about anything else? I'd spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect girlfriend, the perfect version of whatever other people wanted me to be. And where had it gotten me? Abandoned by my parents, betrayed by my fiancé, sitting alone in a hotel room with nothing but a ruined wedding dress, and $300 to my name. But Alex was offering me something different, not love. We were both too honest to pretend this was a fairy tale romance, but respect, partnership, and the freedom to discover who I really was. It was insane, reckless, and completely unprecedented in my carefully planned life. Which was exactly why it felt right. When I called him at 8 the next morning, my voice was steady despite the enormity of what I was about to say. Alex, it's Emily. Good morning, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. How did you sleep? Terribly, I admitted, but I've made my decision. A pause. And? Yes, I said simply. Let's do this. Let's get married. The silence stretched for so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Alex laughed, a sound of pure joy that made something warm unfurl in my chest. Emily Chen, he said, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Are you sure about this? I'm sure about saying yes to something that feels right instead of something that looks right, I replied. I'm sure about taking control of my own life for once. Beyond that, we'll figure it out as we go. That's all anyone can do, he said. I'll pick you up in an hour. We have arrangements to make. Everything happened with breathtaking speed after that. Alex, I quickly discovered, was a man who knew how to make things happen. Within hours, he'd arranged for a marriage license, contacted a judge he knew who could perform the ceremony on short notice, and even found time to take me shopping for something appropriate to wear. You don't have to do all this, I protested, as we walked through Bergdorf Goodman, past displays of clothing that cost more than I used to make in a month at my old job. I have clothes. You have a backpack with a few items thrown in during a crisis, Alex corrected gently. You deserve better than that. Besides, I want you to have something beautiful to remember this day by, something that's yours, chosen by you, without any painful associations. He was right, I realized. Everything I owned was connected to my old life, clothes chosen with Michael's preferences in mind, gifts from parents who had betrayed me, reminders of a person I was no longer sure I wanted to be. The sales associate, Clearly recognizing Alex as someone important helped me select a simple but elegant dress in cream-colored silk. It was nothing like the elaborate gown that had been destroyed, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Classic, timeless, and completely my own choice. "Beautiful," Alex said when I emerged from the dressing room. But he wasn't looking at the dress. He was looking at my face, at what I suspected was the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. We were married the next afternoon in a small ceremony at the judge's chambers. Alex had managed to arrange for his sister Victoria to fly in from Boston as a witness, and she'd brought along her husband James. I'd been nervous about meeting Alex's family, worried they would see me as some kind of gold digger or opportunist. Instead, Victoria embraced me warmly the moment we met. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear as she hugged me. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For putting that look back in my brother's eyes," she said simply. "I haven't seen him this happy in years." The ceremony itself was brief and elegant. No orchestra, no crowds, no elaborate decorations. Just Alex and me, standing before a kind judge who seemed genuinely pleased to be marrying two people who had chosen each other freely. When Alex slipped the simple platinum band onto my finger, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. "Emily Blackwood," the judge pronounced, and the name sounded like a new identity, a fresh start. "You may kiss your bride," he told Alex with a wink. The kiss was gentle, respectful. The kiss of partners, sealing an agreement, rather than lovers consumed by passion. But there was warmth in it, and promise, and something that felt like the beginning of real affection. That evening, we celebrated with dinner at Alex's penthouse apartment, overlooking Central Park. Victoria and James joined us, along with Alex's business partner David and his wife Sarah. It was intimate and relaxed, nothing like the elaborate reception that had been planned for my first wedding. Instead of hundreds of acquaintances making polite conversation, there were 6 people who genuinely cared about each other, sharing stories and laughter over excellent wine and perfectly prepared food. "So how did you two meet?" Sarah asked during dessert, clearly expecting a romantic story. Alex and I exchanged glances. We'd agreed to be honest about our unconventional beginning, but we hadn't quite figured out how to explain it to others. "I was having the worst day of my life," I said finally. "And Alex was kind enough to help a stranger who needed it." "Love at first sight?" Victoria teased. "Respect at first sight," Alex corrected with a smile. "Sometimes that's even better." After our guests left, Alex and I stood on his terrace, looking out over the glittering lights of Manhattan. The city spread out below us like a constellation, full of possibilities and new beginnings. "Are you having second thoughts?" Alex asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. Here I was, married to a man I'd met 3 days ago, living in a world so different from anything I'd known that it felt like stepping into a movie. By any rational measure, I should have been terrified. "No?" I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "Are you?" "Not even for a moment," he replied. "I meant what I said in the restaurant, Emily. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when it comes in the most unexpected form." We talked until late that night, sitting on his comfortable couch, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. Alex told me about losing his parents in a car accident when he was 25, about building his investment company from nothing, about the loneliness that came with success when you had no one to share it with. I told him about always feeling like I was performing a role rather than living my own life, about the pressure to be perfect that had followed me since childhood, about the strange relief I'd felt when everything fell apart, because it meant I could finally stop pretending. "What do you want now?" he asked as the city grew quiet around us. "Not what your parents wanted, not what Michael wanted. What do you want for yourself?" It was such a simple question, but I realized no one had ever asked me that before. I'd spent so long trying to meet other people's expectations that I'd never stopped to consider my own desires. "I want to matter," I said slowly, working through the thought as I spoke. "I want to do something meaningful with my life, something that makes a difference. I want to travel and see things I've only read about. I want to learn who I am when I'm not trying to please anyone else." I paused, then added quietly, "And I want to build something real with someone who sees me as an equal partner, not as a project to be managed or a trophy to be displayed." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "I can help with the travel," he said. "My business takes me all over the world, and I'd love to have you come with me. As for the rest, I think you'll figure that out. You're stronger than you know, Emily. What you did, walking away from everything that was hurting you, taking a chance on something completely unknown, that takes incredible courage." "It didn't feel courageous," I admitted. "It felt like desperation." Sometimes they're the same thing, he said with a smile. The best decisions I've ever made felt terrifying at the time. Later, as I settled into the guest room, Alex had prepared for me. He'd been clear that our marriage would develop at whatever pace felt comfortable for both of us. I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 4 days. This time last week, I'd been frantically addressing wedding invitations and worrying about seating charts. Now I was Emily Blackwood, married to a man who valued my independence and wanted to help me discover my own dreams. I pulled out my phone and, for the first time since leaving Westchester, turned it on. The screen immediately filled with notifications, missed calls, text messages, voicemails from everyone I'd left behind. My parents, Michael, my former bridesmaids, college friends who'd heard about the wedding disaster through the grapevine. I scrolled through them quickly, noting the progression from concern to confusion to anger. My mother's messages were particularly venomous, accusing me of selfishness and ingratitude. Michael's were painful to read, pleading, apologetic, promising he could change if I'd just come home and give him another chance. But the word home didn't apply to Westchester anymore. This penthouse apartment, with its view of Central Park and its promise of new possibilities, felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived. And Alex, sleeping just down the hall, felt more like family than the people who'd raised me. I deleted all the messages without responding. That life was over, and I was finally ready to start living my own. Outside my window, the city hummed with quiet energy, and for the first time in years, I fell asleep feeling hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks into my new life as Emily Blackwood, I experienced something I'd never known before: genuine contentment. Alex and I had settled into an easy routine in his penthouse. Mornings began with coffee on the terrace, discussing our plans for the day. He would head to his office for meetings while I explored the city, visited museums, or simply walked through neighborhoods I'd never seen before, discovering who I was when I wasn't performing for anyone else. In the evenings, we'd cook dinner together or try new restaurants, talking about everything and nothing. Alex was endlessly curious about my thoughts and opinions, asking what I'd seen during the day, what I'd liked or disliked, what I wanted to explore next. It was such a contrast to my relationship with Michael, where conversations had often felt scripted, predictable. I was beginning to understand what it meant to be truly seen by another person. Alex noticed when I lingered in bookstores, so he filled his study with novels I might enjoy. He saw how I lit up talking about art, so he arranged for private tours of galleries. When I mentioned missing cooking, something I'd loved but had little time for while planning a wedding, he cleared his schedule one Saturday so we could spend the entire day in the kitchen together, making pasta from scratch and laughing at our mistakes. It wasn't love yet, but it was something deeper than I'd experienced before: partnership, respect, and the thrilling possibility that love might grow naturally from such solid foundations. That contentment shattered on a Tuesday morning when I decided to share a photo on social media. It had been Victoria's idea, actually. She'd taken a beautiful picture of Alex and me the previous weekend at his house in the Hamptons. We were sitting on his dock at sunset, my head on his shoulder, both of us laughing at something his business partner David had said. It was candid and natural, capturing a moment of genuine happiness. "You should post this," Victoria had said, showing me the photo on her phone. "You both look so peaceful, so right together." I'd hesitated. I hadn't posted anything on social media since the morning my world fell apart, but looking at the photo, I felt proud of the life I was building. I wanted to share this happiness, this new version of myself, who wore designer clothes but still felt authentic, who lived in luxury but hadn't forgotten where she came from. So I posted it with a simple caption: "Finding happiness in unexpected places. #new beginnings, #grateful. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing with notifications, likes, comments, shares, but not the kind of positive engagement I'd expected. The comments ranged from confused to cruel. "Wait, isn't this the girl who was supposed to marry Michael Chen last month? Who is this guy? Did she cheat on Michael? Gold digger much? That ring probably cost more than my car. This is disgusting. Poor Michael dodged a bullet." But it was the private messages that truly devastated me. Friends from college, people I'd considered close, writing to express their shock and disappointment. Sarah, my former maid of honor, sent a particularly painful message. What the hell? We were so worried about you after you disappeared, and now you're posting photos with some random rich guy? Did you ever actually love Michael, or was this always about money?" I stared at the screen, watching my carefully constructed new life crumble in real time, as the post was shared and reshared, each iteration adding new layers of judgment and speculation. Someone had tagged Michael in the comments, and seeing his name there made my stomach lurch. But it was the final notification that made my blood run cold. My mother had commented publicly on the photo. Interesting how quickly some people forget their responsibilities to family. "We raised you better than this, Emily." The comment had dozens of likes and replies, turning my personal happiness into a public spectacle. I could see the narrative forming in real time, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family and fiancé for a wealthy stranger. The gold digger who never really loved anyone except money. My hands were shaking as I deleted the post, but I knew it was too late. Screenshots lived forever on the internet, and the damage was already done. "Emily?" Alex's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard him come home from his morning meetings. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned to show him my phone, scrolling through the increasingly vicious comments and messages. His expression darkened as he read, his jaw tightening with each cruel word. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I just wanted to share something beautiful, and now everyone thinks I'm some kind of manipulative." "Stop." Alex took the phone from my hands and set it aside, then pulled me into his arms. "You have nothing to apologize for, nothing. But they're saying such horrible things about you, about us, about why we're together." I was crying now, all the peace and confidence I'd built over the past few weeks crumbling. What if they're right? What if this does look like I just ran off with the first rich man who would have me? Alex pulled back to look at me, his hands gentle on my face. "Emily, listen to me. I don't care what strangers on the internet think about our marriage. I care about you, about us, about the life we're building together. Do you regret marrying me?" "No," I said immediately. "Never." "Do you feel used or manipulated or coerced in any way?" "Of course not. You've been nothing but respectful and kind." "Then nothing else matters," he said firmly. "The people who matter. Victoria, David, Sarah, my real friends. They see how happy you've made me. They see how you've come alive these past few weeks. Anyone who would judge you based on internet gossip isn't worth your concern." But even as he spoke, my phone continued buzzing with notifications. The story was spreading, morphing, becoming something uglier with each telling. I could see the headlines forming. "Runaway bride marries millionaire weeks after abandoning fiancé." "Alex," I said quietly, "this is going to affect you too. Your business, your reputation. People are going to think you're the kind of man who preys on vulnerable women, who, let them think what they want," he said, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He was a public figure, the CEO of a successful investment firm. His reputation mattered in ways mine never had. The next few hours were brutal. More messages poured in, some supportive, but many more that were cutting and cruel. Former colleagues questioning my character. High school acquaintances who barely knew me weighing in with opinions about my choices. Strangers who had somehow found my profile sharing their thoughts about what kind of person I must be. The worst part was seeing Michael's name pop up in my notifications. He'd tried calling several times and finally left a voicemail that I listened to with trembling hands. I saw the post before you deleted it. I can't believe this is how I'm finding out you're married." "Married, Emily, to someone you probably met 5 minutes after you left me. I know I messed up. I know I let my doubts get in the way of what we had. But this? This is just cruel. Call me back. Please, we need to talk." His voice broke on the last word, and despite everything, I felt a stab of guilt. Whatever had gone wrong between us, Michael hadn't deserved to find out about my marriage through social media gossip. Alex found me on the terrace that evening, staring out at the city lights and trying to process the day's events. He'd spent most of the afternoon in his study on phone calls, with his publicist, his business partners, his lawyer, doing damage control for a situation I'd created. "I'm thinking I should leave," I said without turning around. "Go somewhere else, let this die down, take the heat off you." "Absolutely not." His voice was sharp with something I'd never heard from him before. Anger. "You're not running away again, Emily. You're not letting these people drive you out of the life you've chosen. But the damage to your reputation will heal," he said firmly. "Gossip has a short shelf life. But if you run now, if you let them chase you away from your own happiness, that damage will be permanent." I turned to face him, seeing the determination in his expression. "Why are you willing to go through this for me? We've known each other for 3 weeks. This can't be worth it for you." Alex was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the lamplight. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Emily?" I see someone who had the courage to walk away from a life that was slowly killing her soul. Someone who took a leap of faith on a stranger's promise because she believed she deserved better than what she was getting. Someone who lights up when she talks about art or books or places she wants to travel, who makes pasta from scratch on Saturday afternoons and laughs when the sauce spatters on her designer dress. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I see someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Someone who makes me remember why I work so hard, not just to accumulate wealth, but to build something meaningful. You think 3 weeks isn't long enough to know someone is worth fighting for? I knew the night I met you that you were extraordinary. Everything since then has just confirmed it. His words hit me like a physical force, and I realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, without my noticing, something had shifted between us. The careful partnership we'd started with had deepened into something warmer, more complex. Maybe not love yet, but definitely the foundation for it. The comments will get worse before they get better, I warned him. My family, they're not going to let this go quietly. They'll probably give interviews, tell their side of the story. It could get really ugly. Then we'll weather it together, he said simply. That's what partners do. That night, as we sat up late, developing a strategy for handling the media attention, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that someone was on my side no matter what came next. Alex wasn't just offering me shelter from the storm, he was standing in it with me, helping me fight back. It was the moment I realized I was falling in love with my husband, not because he was wealthy or because he'd rescued me from my lowest point, but because he saw the best in me and refused to let the world convince me I was worth less than that. The storm was far from over, but for the first time since it began, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The media storm that followed my social media post was unlike anything I could have imagined. What started as cruel comments from former friends evolved into something much more vicious and public. By the end of the week, gossip blogs had picked up the story, spinning increasingly dramatic versions of events. Runaway bride secret marriage to Manhattan mogul was one of the kinder headlines. My parents, predictably, were more than happy to fuel the fire. I discovered this when Alex's publicist Marcus called an emergency meeting at the penthouse. A slim, impeccably dressed man in his 40s, Marcus had handled crisis communications for some of the city's most prominent figures. But even he looked grim as he spread newspapers and printed articles across Alex's dining table. They gave an exclusive interview to the lifestyle section of the Times, he said without preamble. It went online an hour ago. My stomach dropped as I read the headline. The daughter we lost, parents speak out about their child's shocking abandonment. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation. My parents had painted themselves as devoted, heartbroken parents who had simply tried to protect their daughter from making a terrible mistake. According to them, they had concerns about Michael's financial stability and had suggested I wait a year before marriage, hardly the cruel sabotage I remembered. We burned the dress in a moment of panic, my mother was quoted as saying. We thought if Emily saw how her hasty decision was destroying something so precious, she might reconsider. We never imagined she would run away and marry a complete stranger within days. We're terrified that this man has manipulated our vulnerable daughter during the most painful moment of her life. My father's quotes were even more damaging. Emily has always been impulsive, but this is beyond anything we could have predicted. We're concerned that Mr. Blackwood took advantage of our daughter's emotional state for his own purposes. No mentally healthy person marries someone they've known for days. The article included a photo from my high school graduation, with me between my parents, all of us smiling. The caption read, Richard and Elizabeth Chen with their daughter Emily, before she cut all contact with them following her marriage to billionaire Alexander Blackwood. Billionaire? I looked at Alex in surprise. I'd known he was wealthy, but I'd never thought to ask exactly how wealthy. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. The numbers don't matter, Emily. What matters is that they're trying to paint me as some kind of predator who swooped in to take advantage of you. Marcus cleared his throat. There's more. They're suggesting that you may have been having an affair with Alex before your original wedding date. They're implying that the marriage was planned in advance, that you deliberately sabotaged your relationship with Michael to be with a wealthier man. I sank into a chair, feeling sick. They're destroying me, making me look like a calculating gold digger who never loved Michael at all. It gets worse. Marcus continued reluctantly. Michael gave a statement too. He confirmed that your parents had expressed concerns about your relationship, but he also said he's, quote, deeply hurt by how quickly you moved on. He's playing the role of the devastated ex-fiancé who's been abandoned for money. I thought about Michael, probably sitting in our old apartment, his apartment now, giving interviews about our failed relationship. Part of me felt guilty for the pain he was experiencing, but a larger part of me was angry that he was contributing to a narrative that painted me as heartless and mercenary. What do we do? I asked. Marcus and Alex exchanged glances. We have a few options, Marcus said. We can ignore it and hope it dies down, but that risks letting their version become the accepted truth. We can issue a statement defending your character, but that keeps the story alive longer. Or, Alex prompted, we tell your side of the story. The real story. The burned dress, the cruel note, the years of conditional love and manipulation. We show the world what really happened. I shuddered at the thought of making my family's cruelty public, of exposing the most painful moments of my life to strangers who would judge and dissect every detail. But looking at the lies spread across Alex's dining table, I realized that staying silent was just another form of letting other people control my narrative. If we do this, I said slowly, I want to tell it myself, not through a publicist or a prepared statement. I want people to hear it directly from me. Alex reached for my hand. Are you sure? Once you put your story out there, you can't take it back. It will follow you forever. Their lies are already following me forever, I replied. At least this way, people will know the truth. We spent the next 2 days preparing. Marcus arranged for an interview with a respected journalist, someone known for thoughtful, in-depth pieces, rather than gossip-mongering. Alex hired additional security for the building after we started receiving threatening messages from strangers who believed my parents' version of events. The most heartbreaking part was watching how the situation affected the people who genuinely cared about me. Victoria called in tears after reading the article, furious that anyone could believe such lies about her new sister-in-law. David and his wife Sarah invited us for dinner, surrounding us with warmth and support that stood in stark contrast to the coldness of my birth family. I've known Alex for 10 years, David told me as we sat in their living room after dinner. I've never seen him as happy as he's been these past few weeks. Anyone who thinks he's capable of manipulation or exploitation doesn't know him at all. But it was Alex's Aunt Margaret who provided the most powerful support. She flew in from London the day before my interview, an elegant woman in her 70s with Alex's same kind eyes and steel spine. My dear, she said, taking my hands in hers, I've lived through enough scandals to know that truth has a way of rising to the surface. Your parents have made a terrible mistake in underestimating both your strength and the decency of the people who matter. The interview took place in Alex's study, with cameras capturing the bookshelves lined with novels we'd chosen together, the flowers he brought me every Friday, the family photos that now included me. I wore a simple navy dress. Elegant, but not ostentatious, the kind of thing any professional woman might choose for an important meeting. The journalist, Catherine Morrison, was everything Marcus had promised. Intelligent, empathetic, and genuinely interested in understanding, rather than sensationalizing. Tell me about the morning of your planned wedding, she said gently. And so I did. I told her about waking up to an empty house, about my parents leaving without explanation, about the burned dress and the cruel note. I described years of conditional love, of feeling like I was always performing for approval that never quite came. I talked about Michael's doubts and my gradual realization that I'd been trying to build a life on a foundation that was already cracked. Some people will say you moved very quickly with Alexander, Catherine observed. How do you respond to suggestions that you were looking for a wealthy man to rescue you? I thought carefully before answering. I understand why people might think that. From the outside, it does look sudden and convenient. But Alex didn't rescue me. I rescued myself when I walked away from a situation that was making me miserable. What Alex offered me wasn't money or status. He offered me respect, partnership, and the space to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. What would you say to your parents if they were watching this interview? This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I looked directly into the camera, thinking of Richard and Elizabeth Chen, probably watching from their pristine living room in Westchester. I would say that I'm sorry they chose cruelty over conversation, manipulation over honesty. I would say that I hope someday they'll understand that love shouldn't come with conditions and strings attached. And I would say that I forgive them, but I won't let them define who I am anymore. After the camera stopped rolling, I felt simultaneously drained and liberated. I'd told my truth, claimed my narrative, refused to be a victim of other people's versions of my life. The interview aired 2 days later, and the response was immediate. This time, the tide of public opinion began to shift. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of family manipulation, of conditional love, of finding happiness in unexpected places. Support came from quarters I'd never expected: women's advocacy groups, domestic abuse survivors, even some of Michael's friends who privately reached out to say they'd always sensed my parents' controlling behavior. My parents, predictably, issued a statement calling the interview a pack of lies designed to justify unconscionable behavior. But their credibility was damaged now. Too many people recognized the patterns I'd described, had lived through similar experiences themselves. "You were magnificent," Alex told me that night as we watched the city lights from our terrace. "Brave and honest, and completely yourself. I couldn't have done it without you," I replied. "Without knowing you were there to catch me if I fell." He pulled me closer, and I rested my head against his shoulder. "You know what I realized today?" he said quietly. "When I watched you telling your story, refusing to be ashamed of choosing happiness over obligation, I realized that I'm not just fond of you anymore, Emily. I'm completely, thoroughly in love with you." The words hit me like sunlight after a storm. I turned to look at him, seeing my own feelings reflected in his eyes. "I love you too," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. "Not because you saved me from my old life, but because you helped me create a new one. Because you see the best in me, and refuse to let me settle for less than that." When he kissed me this time, it wasn't the careful, respectful kiss of our wedding day. It was the kiss of two people who had chosen each other fully, who had weathered a storm together and emerged stronger. The scandal would continue for a few more weeks, gradually fading as new stories captured the public's attention. My parents never reached out to reconcile, and eventually I stopped hoping they would. Michael moved to California, and I heard through mutual friends that he'd started therapy to work through his own family issues. But none of that mattered as much as the life Alex and I were building together. We traveled to London to visit Aunt Margaret, to Paris for our delayed honeymoon, to small towns in Italy where no one knew our story and we could simply be a couple in love. I started volunteering with an organization that helped women escape abusive relationships, finding purpose in using my experience to help others. Alex supported my work completely, even hosting fundraising events at our home. Slowly, carefully, we built something real. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of love that grows stronger when tested by adversity. Looking back, I could see now that the burned wedding dress had been exactly what my mother intended it to be, the end of a dream. But what she hadn't counted on was that sometimes, when one dream dies, it makes space for something even better to grow in its place. 1 year later, I stood in the garden of our Connecticut home, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house was a wedding gift from Alex, not the penthouse where we'd first learned to love each other, but something entirely ours. A restored colonial with wide porches, sprawling gardens, and enough space for the family we were hoping to build together. It was my birthday, and Alex had promised me a quiet celebration, just the two of us, Victoria and James and Aunt Margaret, who had decided to spend the summer in America to be closer to her newfound niece. The contrast to last year's birthday, when I'd been frantically finalizing wedding details and trying to manage my parents' increasingly impossible demands, was not lost on me. I heard footsteps on the gravel path and turned to see Alex approaching with 2 cups of coffee, still in his pajamas and robe. His hair was tousled from sleep, and he had that soft, unguarded expression he wore only in our most private moments. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, kissing my cheek as he handed me my coffee. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," I replied, settling into his arms as we watched the garden come alive in the morning light. A year of marriage had taught us each other's rhythms. Alex knew I loved these quiet morning moments before the day claimed us. I knew he needed at least 2 cups of coffee before attempting serious conversation. We'd learned to navigate his intense work schedule and my growing involvement with the women's shelter. We'd survived our first real fight about whether to buy this house, with me insisting I didn't need anything so grand, and him arguing that we both deserved a place where we could truly be ourselves. The house had been worth fighting for. Here, surrounded by rolling hills and ancient oak trees, we'd found a peace that the city couldn't offer. Here, I'd finally learned what it meant to feel completely at home. "Any regrets?" Alex asked, a question that had become something of a birthday tradition between us. I considered it seriously, as I always did. About the house? Never. About leaving the city? Sometimes I miss the energy, but no. About marrying you? I turned in his arms to face him. Not even for a second. About your family? This was the harder question, the one that still had the power to create a small ache in my chest. My parents had never reached out after my interview aired. I'd heard through former neighbors that they'd sold the Westchester house and moved to Florida, starting fresh somewhere no one knew their story. Michael had indeed moved to California and, according to mutual friends, was engaged to someone new, a lawyer from his firm who apparently came with her parents' full approval. I regret that they chose their pride over their daughter, I said carefully. I regret that they'll never know the grandchildren we're hoping to have. But I don't regret choosing my own happiness over their expectations anymore. It had taken months of therapy to reach that peace. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the name, had helped me understand that loving someone didn't mean accepting their abuse, that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, and that some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. Speaking of children, Alex said with a smile that made my heart skip, I have something for you. He pulled a small wrapped box from his robe pocket, and my breath caught. We'd been talking about starting a family for months, but I wasn't expecting. It's not what you think, he said quickly, seeing my expression. Well, not exactly. Inside the box was a key. Old brass, ornate, clearly antique. What does it open? I asked, confused. The women's shelter, he said, his voice soft with emotion. The board approved your proposal yesterday. The new wing will be ready by Christmas. 20 additional beds, a children's play area, the legal aid office you wanted, and a small apartment for the director. I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what he was saying. For months, I'd been working with the shelter's board to expand their services, to create a comprehensive support system for women and children fleeing abuse. The project had become my passion, my purpose, but the funding had seemed impossible to secure. Alex, this is too much. The cost is an investment in something that matters to you, he said firmly, which means it matters to me. Besides, Aunt Margaret insisted on contributing. She says supporting strong women is the best use of her money. Tears blurred my vision as I threw my arms around his neck. This wasn't just a generous gift. It was recognition of who I'd become, support for the work that gave my life meaning. It was Alex seeing not just the woman he'd married, but the woman I was still becoming. I love you, I whispered against his ear. I love you too, he replied. More than I ever thought possible. We were interrupted by the sound of cars in the driveway, Victoria and James arriving early, followed by Aunt Margaret's hired car. I hurried inside to dress while Alex went to greet our guests, my heart still racing with excitement about the shelter expansion. The day unfolded with the easy warmth that had become characteristic of our gatherings. Victoria had brought photo albums from Alex's childhood, much to his mortification and my delight. Aunt Margaret regaled us with stories from her youth in London during the war, tales of resilience and courage that reminded me why I'd connected with her so immediately. James, ever the practical lawyer, updated us on the final legal details of severing my ties to my parents' estate, a process I'd initiated months ago when they'd tried to claim I was mentally incompetent to make financial decisions. The irony that they were now trying to profit from my marriage to Alex wasn't lost on any of us. You're free, James said simply, handing me the final documents. Legally, financially, and in every way that matters. They have no claim on you or your future. As evening approached, we gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Victoria was showing me pictures of her daughter's first steps on her phone when Alex's assistant called with an urgent business matter. He excused himself reluctantly, promising to keep the call brief. You know, Aunt Margaret said after he'd gone inside, I've been thinking about your story, dear. About how it all began. Which part? I asked, settling into the porch swing beside her. The burned dress, she said thoughtfully. Such a cruel thing to do to one's own child. But I wonder, do you think they did you a favor without meaning to? I considered her question. The burned dress had certainly been the catalyst for everything that followed. My flight to New York, meeting Alex, discovering who I could be when I wasn't trying to please others. Maybe, I said slowly, but that doesn't excuse the cruelty of it. Oh, absolutely not, Aunt Margaret agreed quickly. Nothing excuses deliberately hurting someone you're supposed to love. But sometimes, terrible people do us accidental kindnesses by showing us exactly who they are. Victoria looked up from her phone. What do you mean? Well, Aunt Margaret said, what if they hadn't burned the dress? What if they'd simply expressed their concerns politely and attended the wedding with fake smiles? Emily might have gone through with marrying that young man, spent years trying to make everyone happy, never discovering her own strength. I thought about Michael, about the life we might have built together. Would we have been happy? Would I have eventually realized that his love came with conditions, that I was performing a role rather than being myself? Or would I have spent decades trying to be the person everyone else wanted me to be? I think, I said carefully, that I would have figured it out eventually. But it might have taken much longer and caused much more pain. Exactly, Aunt Margaret said with satisfaction. Your parents thought they were punishing you, but they actually freed you. They showed you their true nature so clearly that you couldn't ignore it anymore. Alex returned as the last light was fading from the sky, apologizing for the interruption and immediately sensing the thoughtful mood that had settled over our group. "What did I miss?" he asked, settling beside me on the swing. "We were discussing the philosophical implications of burned wedding dresses," Victoria said with a grin. "Ah," Alex said solemnly. "A weighty topic indeed." I laughed, leaning against his shoulder as he wrapped his arm around me. "We were talking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in our lives. Like meeting your husband on a park bench when you'd lost everything?" he asked. "Like meeting my husband on a park bench when I'd lost everything," I agreed. Later that night, after our guests had gone home and we were alone in our bedroom, Alex and I lay talking in the darkness. It had become one of our favorite times, when the day's responsibilities were set aside and we could simply be together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night?" he asked. "If I'd just driven past that bench where you were sitting?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not that night, maybe not that way, but eventually." "You think we were meant to be?" I turned to face him in the dim light from the window. "I think we were meant to become the people we needed to be in order to find each other. Everything that happened before your parents' death, your years of building the business alone, my years of trying to be perfect for the wrong people, it all led us to that bench at exactly the right moment." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I have something else for you, another birthday gift." "Alex, the shelter was more than enough. This one's different," he said, reaching into the bedside drawer. "It's not from me alone." He handed me an envelope, thick paper with my name, written in elegant script. Inside was a letter from the shelter's board, officially offering me the position of executive director of the new expanded facility. "They want me to run it?" I asked, stunned. "They want you to build it into everything you've envisioned," Alex said. "The salary isn't enormous. Nonprofit work never pays what it should. But it comes with that apartment on the 3rd floor if you want it for overnight stays, full benefits, and complete autonomy to develop programs as you see fit." I stared at the letter, reading it again to make sure I wasn't dreaming. A year ago, I'd been a failed bride, with no direction and no purpose. Now I was being offered the chance to run an organization that could change women's lives, to build something meaningful from the ground up. "What do you think?" Alex asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew my answer. "I think," I said, kissing him deeply, "that I'm the luckiest woman alive." "Even luckier than the woman who got to marry me?" he teased. "Especially luckier than her," I replied, laughing. "She has to put up with your ego." We made love that night with a tenderness and passion that still surprised me sometimes. A year ago, I thought love was about grand gestures and fairy tale endings. Now I knew it was about choosing each other every day, about building something real together through both joy and difficulty. Afterward, as Alex slept beside me, I got up and walked to the window. Our garden stretched out in the moonlight, peaceful and full of possibility. In a few hours, I would call the shelter and accept their offer. In a few months, I would be running a facility that could house and support 40 women and their children as they rebuilt their lives. In my dresser drawer, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, I still kept a small piece of my original wedding dress, a fragment I'd saved from the wreckage. Not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as a symbol of what I'd gained. The courage to choose my own path, the strength to demand the love I deserved, and the wisdom to recognize happiness when it came in an unexpected form. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it expecting to see something from Victoria or one of my colleagues at the shelter. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "Happy birthday, Emily. I saw the news about the shelter expansion. I'm proud of the woman you've become, Michael." After more than a year of silence, he'd reached out. I thought about responding, about asking how he was, about sharing some of the peace I'd found. But in the end, I simply deleted the message. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it, even for closure. I looked once more at the garden, at the home Alex and I had built together, at the life that had grown from the ashes of everything I'd thought I wanted. Tomorrow, I would start building something new again, a place where other women could find the safety and support they needed to discover their own strength. The burned wedding dress had been meant to destroy me. Instead, it had freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. And as I slipped back into bed beside the man who loved me not despite my scars but because of how beautifully I'd healed from them, I smiled in the darkness and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for teaching me that sometimes the best way to find your happily ever after is to stop looking for it and start creating it yourself.